Listen, I'm not the kind of guy who calls into late night radio shows or posts on paranormal forums. You know me, I'm John Norris. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta, where the humidity is thick enough to swallow a man whole, and I've spent the last 15 years as a survival instructor, teaching people how to stay alive when the world tries to kill them. I know the woods. I know the sounds of starving predator and the silence of a forest that's about to break. But what happened in the Blue Ridge Mountains this past April, that wasn't nature. Before I get to it, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt that prickle on your neck? Not like someone is watching you, but like something is judging your weight, wondering how hard it will be to drag you into the brush. Have you ever heard the sound that your brain simply refused to translate? And if I told you that a 300-pound apex predator could move faster than a hawk and stand on two legs like a man, would you stay in the room or would you run? I'm writing this down because my hands shake too much to hold a beer, let alone a steering wheel, and my wife Sarah won't even look at the tree line anymore. It started with a road trip, just a spring break run to clear our heads. I'd spent the winter rebuilding a '78 Bronco, my pride and joy, and I wanted to see how she'd handle the incline and the wind of the high ridges. We left Mississippi behind, heading toward the darker, denser parts of the Appalachians. It was supposed to be just me, Sarah, and our 10-year-old son, Leo. We even brought along Buster, a golden retriever we'd rescued, who usually didn't have a lick of sense but was good company. The weather was wrong from the jump. It's spring, right? Should be soft rains and blooming laurel. Instead, we got this biting, relentless wind. It whistled through the gaps like a woman screaming in a cellar. We were deep in the Nantala National Forest. I shifted the location from the main Blue Ridge Parkway because the lore of that place, the land of the noonday sun, always fascinated me. It's a place where the light disappears early and the shadows stay long. I was under the hood of the Bronco at a scenic pull-off near sunset. The wind was buffeting the truck, rocking it on its suspension. Sarah was inside trying to get Leo to finish some homework, and Buster was tied to the bumper. That's when the smell hit me. It wasn't a dead deer, it wasn't a skunk, it was wet dog, old copper, and something like rotted cabbage. It was heavy, overpowering. I stood up, wiping grease off my hands, and looked toward the dense wall of hemlocks. Buster wasn't barking. That was the first red flag. He was pressed flat against the gravel, his ears pinned back, letting out a whine so high-pitched it sounded like a tea kettle. "John?" Sarah called from the window. "What's wrong with the dog?" "I don't know," I muttered. I reached into the cab and grabbed my maglite. It was still light out, but the shadows under those trees were like ink. I scanned the tree line. About 30 yards in, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear. It was massive, covered in matted, dark gray fur, but it was leaning against the trunk in a way a bear doesn't. Its arms were long, ending in hands, actual hands with hooked black claws wrapped around the bark. Then it shifted. It didn't drop to 4 legs, it pulled itself upright. It had to be 7.5 feet tall. The head was the nightmare fuel, pointed ears set high on the skull, a long, lupine muzzle, and eyes that reflected the dying sun with a sickly, yellowish tapetum, lucidum glow. It didn't growl, it huffed, a rhythmic, intelligent sound. I'm a survivalist. I faced black bears with nothing but a fixed blade knife, but looking at this thing, my lizard brain screamed one word: Apex. I didn't scream, I didn't move, I just watched as it took a single step out of the shadows. The way the joints in its legs worked, disintegrate like a dog's, but with the muscular bulk of a bodybuilder, made my stomach turn. It looked at the Bronco, then it looked directly at me. It bared teeth that were too long for its mouth, and for a split second, I swear, it looked like it was grinning. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Get in the back, lock the doors, do it now." The wind kicked up a massive gust, howling through the gorge, and when the dust cleared, a second later, the space between the trees was empty. The thing was gone. But Buster started howling, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, and I knew we weren't alone. I hadn't heard of Dogman back then. I thought they were just campfire stories for the tourists. I was wrong. I didn't wait for the engine to cool. I slammed the hood of the Bronco and the metallic bang echoed off the rock faces like a gunshot. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest, but years of training kicked in. Rule 1 of survival: if the environment tells you you're the prey, you leave the environment. I grabbed Buster's collar. The dog was dead weight, his claws scraping uselessly against the asphalt as I hoisted him into the back. "John, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost," Sarah said, her voice tight with that edge of maternal instinct that knows when fine is a lie. Leo was staring at me from the back seat, his tablet forgotten. "Bear," I lied. It was a clean, easy lie. A big, aggressive boar. We're moving to a different site. Buckle up. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands slick with sweat against the steering wheel. I fired up the V8, and the rumble usually comforted me, but tonight it felt like a dinner bell. As I pulled out of the overlook, I checked the rearview mirror. For a split second, in the red glow of my tail lights, I saw a shape detach itself from the darkness of the trees. It didn't run like a dog. It leapt, covering 15 feet in a single bound, landing on the pavement where we had just been standing. It stayed crouched, its long muscular arms touching the ground, watching the red lights of the Bronco fade into the mist. The wind was screaming now, buffeting the truck so hard I had to fight to keep it in lane. We were heading toward a more established campground, about 20 miles down the ridge, thinking safety in numbers was our best bet. But as we wound deeper into the Nantala, the fog rolled in, a thick grey soup that swallowed the headlights. "The GPS is looping, John," Sarah muttered, shaking her phone. "It says we are on a Forest Service road that shouldn't exist." I looked at the dashboard. The compass was spinning. Now, I'm a survival instructor. I can navigate by the stars, but there were no stars tonight. Only the grey wall and the howling wind. I shifted into 4 low as the pavement turned to gravel, then to mud. The Bronco groaned, the suspension articulating over deep ruts. "We're stopping," I said. "I can see the drop-off. We'll hunker down until first light." I parked the truck in a small clearing surrounded by ancient, gnarled oaks. I reached into the center console and pulled out my Glock 20, a 10mm powerhouse I carry for bears. I checked the chamber. 15 plus 1. It felt like a toy. "Everyone, stay in the truck," I commanded. "Don't even roll down a window." The silence that followed the engine cutting out was worse than the wind. It was a heavy, expectant silence. Buster was huddled in the floorboards, shivering so hard the floorboards rattled. It started on the roof, a sound like a dry branch dragging across metal, but there were no overhanging trees. "Is that a bird?" Leo whispered, his eyes wide. Thud. The entire 3-ton Bronco rocked on its springs. Something heavy had landed on the roof. I looked up at the headliner. I could see the metal bowing inward under the weight of something massive. Then came the breathing. It wasn't the panting of a dog. It was deep, rhythmic and wet. It sounded like a man with a chest cold but amplified 100 times. "John?" Sarah's voice was a pinprick of terror. I pointed the maglite at the side window. A face pressed against the glass. It wasn't a mask. It couldn't have been. The skin was a mottled, bruised gray, stretched tight over a skull that was half wolf, half human. The eyes were huge, amber orbs with vertical pupils that didn't blink. It was looking at us, not with animal curiosity but with a cold, calculating intelligence. It was studying the door handle. It was learning how we were enclosed. I leveled the Glock at the glass, but I hesitated. If I fired, the muzzle flash in that tiny cab would blind us, and the sound would deafen us. More importantly, if I didn't kill it with the first shot, I just broken the only barrier between us and that. The creature lifted a hand, a human-like hand, with elongated fingers and black obsidian claws. It began to tap on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. It was mimicking the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Then it leaned in close, its hot breath fogging the window, and it let out a sound I will take to my grave. It wasn't a howl, it was a distorted, mocking imitation of a human laugh. A guttural, raspy heh heh heh. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The weight left the roof. "Is it gone?" Leo sobbed. I didn't answer. I reached for the ignition. But before I could turn the key, the driver's side door, the heavy, steel reinforced door of my '78 Bronco, was suddenly ripped outward with such violence the hinges screamed and snapped like toothpicks. The cold wind rushed in, and the massive fur-covered arm reached inside. It didn't grab me, it grabbed Sarah. The scream Sarah let out wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul being physically uprooted. I didn't think, I didn't breathe, I just lunged. I grabbed her waist, my boots slipping on the muddy floorboards as that massive charcoal furred hand clamped around her shoulder. The strength was impossible, like being hooked to a winch. The Bronco rocked violently as the creature stepped back, dragging both of us toward the gaping hole where my door used to be. "Leo, stay down," I roared. I dropped the Glock. In that confined space, with Sarah between me and the beast, I couldn't risk a stray 10mm round through her chest. I reached for the one thing I always keep strapped to the seat frame, a 24-inch Ontario bush machete. I swung blindly into the dark. The blade connected with a sickening thud, not the sound of hitting wood, but the dense wet resistance of muscle and bone. A spray of hot, metallic smelling fluid hit my face. The creature let out a sound that shattered the windshield, a subsonic roar that felt like a physical blow to the head. It loosened its grip, just enough. I kicked Sarah back toward the passenger side and scrambled out into the mud, swinging the machete in a desperate arc. The moonlight was filtered through the racing clouds, giving me jagged strobe-like glimpses of the nightmare. It was standing 10 feet away, clutching its forearm where I'd opened a gash. It was even bigger than it looked from the truck, easily 8 feet tall, with a barrel chest that made the grizzly look lean. It didn't look hurt, it looked insulted. "Get out of here, Sarah! Drive!" I yelled, knowing the door was gone but the engine was still alive. But she couldn't. From the darkness behind the truck, 2 more pairs of yellow eyes ignited. They weren't alone. Dogmen are often reported as solitary, but the lore speaks of packs, social, tactical hunters. We were in a kill box. The wind whipped the trees into a frenzy, masking the sound of their movement as they began to circle. One of them, smaller and more wiry, skittered across the clearing on all fours with a speed that defied physics. It didn't run, it flowed. It snatched Buster, my 70-pound dog, right off the floorboards before he could even bark. He didn't even have time to yelp. Just a snap of a neck and the sound of heavy paws vanishing into the laurel. "Leo, get in the front, move!" Sarah screamed, sliding into the driver's seat. The alpha, the one I'd cut, stepped forward. It didn't growl, it made a clicking sound with its tongue, a dry rhythmic staccato. It reached out, and for a second I thought it was going to strike. Instead, it grabbed the entire frame of the Bronco's roll bar and tilted the truck. The 3-ton vehicle groaned, the tires on the left side leaving the mud. "John!" I lunged for the alpha's throat with a machete, but it was like trying to hit smoke. It swatted my arm away with a backhand that sent me flying 10 feet into a hemlock. My ribs cracked. I heard a sound like dry kindling snapping. My vision went white. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the engine of the Bronco roar. Sarah had found the gear. The truck slammed back down onto the 4 wheels, the tires spinning, throwing a wall of mud over the Alpha. She didn't head for the road. She couldn't see it. She drove straight into the brush, the heavy bumper clearing a path through the saplings. The Alpha didn't chase the truck. It turned its head toward me. It walked over, its gait heavy and deliberate. It looked down at me, and I saw the intelligence again, that terrifying, ancient recognition. It didn't want the truck, it wanted the one who bit back. It reached down, its claws hooking under my tactical vest, and lifted me off the ground like I was a rag doll. The world began to move at a blurred, sickening speed as it broke into a loping run, carrying me deep into the land of the noonday sun, where the ravines are so deep the light never touches the bottom. I watched the lights of my own truck disappear into the fog, Sarah and Leo screaming my name until the wind swallowed them whole. I was a survival instructor. I knew 100 ways to find water, 1,000 ways to build a fire. But as the creature's hot, carnivorous breath washed over my neck, I realized I didn't know a single way to die that wouldn't hurt. The world became a blur of jagged branches and stinging pine needles. I was draped over the creature's shoulder, like a kill. Every time its massive hocks hit the earth, a fresh spike of agony shot through my cracked ribs. I've tracked mountain lions through the MS Delta swamps, but this was a machine made of muscle and malice. It moved through the vertical terrain of the Nantala as if gravity was a suggestion, not a law. Eventually the sickening motion stopped. It dropped me. I hit the floor of a shallow limestone cave. A rock house, we call them in the south. The air inside smelled of old copper, wet fur, and the cloying wetness of rot. My vision swam, but the survival instructor in me was already cataloging. Entrance is narrow, ceiling is low, ground is damp, no light. The Alpha stood at the mouth of the cave, its silhouette cutting off the moon. It wasn't alone. 2 other sets of amber eyes blinked in the darkness of the ravine outside. They weren't eating me. Not yet. They were waiting. In the lore of the Dogman, there is a recurring theme. They don't just kill, they display. They show you what they are before they end you. I felt around in the dirt, my fingers screaming. My machete was gone, lost in the brush. My Glock, somewhere in the mud by the Bronco. But my belt was still there. On my right hip, in a Kydex sheet, was my last resort, a custom-made survival hatchet with a hammer pole head, high carbon steel. I didn't draw it. If I showed my hand, it would snap my neck before I could blink. The Alpha stepped into the cave. It made that clicking sound again and leaned down. Its muzzle was inches from my face. I could see the black, leathery skin of its nose twitching. It wanted to smell my fear. It wanted to taste the adrenaline in my sweat. "You forgot one thing," I wheezed, the words bubbling through the blood in my throat. The creature tilted its head, an almost human gesture of confusion. I didn't go for its head. I'm a survivalist. I know how to break a machine. I went for the hinge. I whipped the hatchet out and buried the sharpened bit deep into the creature's digitigrade ankle, the heel that sits halfway up a canine's leg. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The roar that followed wasn't a sound. It was a physical vibration that rattled my teeth. The Alpha collapsed, its massive weight hitting the cave floor. It lunged for me, but its shattered leg gave out, sending it sprawling. I didn't run for the woods. I knew I couldn't outrun the others on the slope. I ran for the rock. I scrambled up the side of the limestone chimney above the cave, my fingers finding holes I didn't know existed. Behind me, the 2 smaller dogmen screeched, a sound like metal tearing and charged the cave mouth. I reached the ledge, 10 feet up, just as the first one reached the base. It started to climb, its claws screeching against the stone. I reached into my vest. I always carry 3 things in my left pouch: a signal flare, a bottle of high-proof rubbing alcohol for cleaning wounds, and a magnesium fire starter. I didn't have time for a fire. I smashed the alcohol bottle against the rock face, above the climbing creature, soaking its matted fur. Then I pulled my emergency flare, a 12-gauge aerial meteor. I didn't fire it into the air. I pointed it straight down. The red phosphorus ignited the alcohol instantly. The Dogman didn't just burn, it became a pillar of screaming chemical fire. It fell backward, crashing into the second creature. The smell of burning hair was nauseating, but it bought me the one thing I needed: a gap. I leapt from the ledge, landing hard on the slope below, and tumbled. I didn't stop. I ran toward the sound of the wind. I knew the Bronco was to the west. I knew the terrain. I followed the scent of my own exhaust, the rich unburned fuel of a 78 V8. I burst onto the logging road just as the headlights cut through the fog. Sarah hadn't left. She was circling. The Bronco battered, the windshield a spiderweb of cracks. Leo in the passenger seat holding my spare tire iron. "Get in!" she screamed, slowing just enough for me to dive through the missing door frame. I hit the floorboards, and she floored it. The Bronco leapt forward, the tires screaming on the gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw them. 3 shapes, one limping, one charred, standing in the middle of the road. They didn't chase. They just watched. The Alpha raised its head and let out a long, mournful howl that transitioned into that terrifying, mocking laugh. We didn't stop until we hit a sheriff's station in Murphy. I told them we hit a bear. I told them the truck was mangled by a landslide. They didn't believe me, but they didn't care, not once they saw the look in Leo's eyes. I'm back in Mississippi now. The Bronco is sitting in the garage. The driver's side door still missing. I haven't fixed it. Every time I look at those snapped hinges, I remember the clicking sound. People ask me why I don't go into the woods anymore. I tell them I've seen enough of nature. But the truth is, I'm waiting. I know the smell of that copper and wet fur. And sometimes, when the wind kicks up in the delta and whistles to the screen door, I hear it tap, tap, tap. It knows where I live, and it knows I still have the hatchet.